Talon's mandibles clicked in disgust as she stepped off the transport shuttle onto Earth soil. The Nigean diplomat in training had dreaded this moment for months, forced to participate in the United Terran government's misguided exchange program. It was 2157, 5 years after first contact, and humanity still fumbled through interstellar relations like children playing with fusion reactors. The spaceport bustled with activity, a cacophony of alien languages mingling with the harsh sounds of human speech. Talon's compound eyes took in the primitive architecture and outdated technology surrounding her. How had these barbarians managed to achieve spaceflight? Their violent history and backward customs made them unfit for galactic society. A human male approached, his mouth curved in what Talon recognized as a smile. She suppressed a shudder. "Welcome to Earth, Talon. I'm Brian Parker, Department of Interstellar Relations. I'll be your guide during your stay." Talon's universal translator conveyed his words, but she chose to respond in halting English. "I require no guide, human. This exchange is waste of time." Brian's smile faltered, but he persisted. "I understand your reservations, but I hope to change your mind about us. New Washington, D.C. has a lot to offer." As they made their way through the spaceport, Talon observed the humans around her. Their soft, furless skin and blunt teeth marked them as prey animals, yet they postured as apex predators. It was almost laughable. Brian led her to a ground transport vehicle, explaining the city's layout and history. Talon tuned out his prattle, focusing instead on the data streams flowing through her neural implant. The Nigean High Command had tasked her with gathering intelligence on Earth's defenses and societal weaknesses. This exchange program provided the perfect cover. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the Nigean embassy. A group of humans had gathered, their faces contorted in anger. They carried crude signs with xenophobic slogans, chanting for the aliens to leave their planet. "Get off our world, you bugs!" one protester shouted, hurling a projectile at the embassy's force field. Brian's demeanor changed instantly. He positioned himself between Talon and the crowd, his body tense and alert. "Stay close," he ordered, guiding her towards a secure entrance. As they hurried inside, Talon caught a glimpse of Brian's service record projected onto her retinal display. Decorated veteran of the Mars Rebellion, expert in close-quarters combat, top marks in xenodiplomacy. Perhaps this human was more than he appeared. Safe within the embassy's walls, Brian's professional mask slipped for a moment. "I'm sorry you had to see that. Not all humans share those views." Talon studied him, noting the genuine concern in his eyes. A curious warmth spread through her thorax, accompanied by an increased heart rate. She dismissed it as a reaction to the stressful situation. "Your protection was adequate," she conceded. Brian's lips quirked. "High praise indeed. I'll take it." As Talon settled into her new quarters, she pondered the complexities of her mission. The humans were more diverse than she had anticipated. Some, like the protesters, confirmed her worst suspicions about the species, but others, like Brian, hinted at hidden depths. She would need to reevaluate her approach. Close observation of this human diplomat might yield valuable insights for the Nigean cause, and if, in the process, she experienced more of those strange physiological reactions to his presence, well, that was a sacrifice she was willing to make for the good of her people. Little did Talon know that Brian harbored secrets of his own. As he left the embassy, he received an encrypted message from his superiors. "Nigean exchange program, suspected cover for invasion intel gathering. Monitor closely. Trust no one." The game was afoot and the fate of two worlds hung in the balance. Days after her arrival on Earth, Talon found herself begrudgingly accepting an invitation from Brian. The human diplomat had been persistent in his efforts to showcase the best of his species, and now he proposed something truly audacious, a diplomatic gala at the United Terran Government headquarters. "It's an opportunity to experience human culture firsthand," Brian explained, his eyes gleaming with enthusiasm. "You'll see how we celebrate, how we interact. It's not just about politics, it's about connection." Talon's mandibles twitched skeptically. "Your species' idea of celebration involves gathering in large groups and engaging in ritualistic movement. How is this supposed to improve my opinion of humanity?" Brian chuckled. You might be surprised. Will you attend? After a moment's hesitation, Talon nodded. Very well. I will observe this gala. The night of the event arrived, and Talon found herself facing an unexpected challenge: human fashion. Brian had arranged for a selection of evening gowns, each modified to accommodate her alien physiology. She selected a midnight blue dress that draped elegantly over her exoskeleton, the fabric shimmering like starlight with each movement. As they entered the grand hall of the United Terran Government headquarters, Talon's compound eyes struggled to process the sensory barrage. Swirling lights in a rainbow of colors danced across the ceiling, while the air vibrated with unfamiliar music. The scent of human foods, some floral, others savory, mingled in a complex olfactory tapestry. Brian gently placed a hand on her upper arm, steadying her. Take it slow, he advised. There's a lot to take in. Talon's antenna quivered. How do you function in such chaos? It's not chaos to us, Brian replied, guiding her through the crowd. It's a celebration of life, of diversity. Look there. He pointed to a group of humans engaged in animated conversation with a delegation of Arcturian ambassadors. The aliens' bioluminescent skin pulsed with colors that complemented the humans' attire, creating a striking visual harmony. As they moved through the gala, Brian introduced Talon to key human officials. She observed their interactions, noting the subtle interplay of body language and tone. It was more complex than she had initially given them credit for. Would you care to dance? Brian asked, gesturing to the area where couples moved in time with the music. Talon hesitated. I am unfamiliar with human dance rituals. I'll guide you, Brian assured her. It's not so different from some of the ceremonial movements in Nigerian culture. As they stepped onto the dance floor, Brian placed one hand on Talon's waist and took her hand with the other. The contact sent an unexpected thrill through her nervous system. She found herself acutely aware of his warmth, the gentle pressure of his touch. They began to move, Brian leading her through the steps of a simple waltz. Talon's natural agility allowed her to quickly adapt to the rhythm. As they twirled among the other dancers, she found herself drawn into the experience, captivated by the interplay of music, movement, and Brian's steady presence. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the entrance. A group of humans burst into the hall, their faces contorted with anger. At their head was a tall, charismatic man with steely eyes and a shock of silver hair. Aliens have no place on Earth, he shouted, his voice carrying over the music. Marcus Holt speaks for true humanity. Brian's demeanor changed instantly. The easygoing diplomat vanished, replaced by a hardened soldier. He positioned himself between Talon and the approaching group, his eyes scanning the room for threats and escape routes. Security breach, he muttered into a concealed communicator. Xenophobic agitators led by Marcus Holt, requesting immediate containment. As chaos erupted around them, Brian guided Talon towards a secure area. She watched in fascination as he coordinated with other human officials, rapidly organizing a response to the threat. His quick thinking and decisive action stood in stark contrast to her preconceptions of human behavior. The security team swiftly neutralized the threat, apprehending Holt and his followers. As order was restored, Talon noticed Brian engaging in hushed conversations with several high-ranking diplomats. His expression was grave, his posture tense. Is something wrong? She asked when he returned to her side. Brian's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Just some routine security matters. Nothing for you to worry about. But Talon's keen senses detected the subtle changes in his pheromones. He was worried and hiding something. As the gala wound down, Brian led Talon to a secluded balcony overlooking the city. The skyscrapers stretched towards the star-studded sky, a testament to human ambition and ingenuity. I apologize for the disruption, Brian said softly. That's not representative of most humans. Talon turned to face him, her compound eyes reflecting the city lights. Perhaps I have been hasty in my judgment of your species. You have shown remarkable adaptability and strength this evening. Brian's expression softened, and he took a step closer. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. But before either could speak, Brian's communicator chirped urgently. His face paled as he read the message. I I need to take care of something, he said, his voice strained. Talon, how would you feel about a trip to Mars? I'd like to show you more of what humanity has achieved. Talon's antenna twitched with curiosity. The Mars colony? That would be interesting, but why the sudden suggestion? I think it would give you a broader perspective on our capabilities, Brian replied, not quite meeting her gaze. We can leave tomorrow if you're willing. As they made plans for the journey, Talon couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this trip than Brian was letting on. The complexities of human behavior continued to intrigue her, especially when it came to this particular human. The next day, as they boarded the sleek shuttle bound for Mars, Talon found herself grappling with unfamiliar emotions. Her mission to gather intelligence on Earth's defenses seemed less important now, overshadowed by her growing fascination with Brian and human culture. As the red planet loomed larger in the view screen, Talon realized that this journey might change more than just her perception of humanity. It could alter the course of Earth-Nigean relations and her own destiny in ways she could never have anticipated. As the shuttle lifted off from Earth's surface, Talon's compound eyes reflected the dwindling cityscape below. The human metropolis, once a symbol of primitive technology to her, now held a strange allure. She turned her gaze to Brian, who sat rigid in the pilot's seat, his teeth clenched in concentration. You seem tense, Talon observed, her universal translator conveying the subtle inflections of concern in her native clicks and chirps. Brian's eyes remained fixed on the instrument panel. Just focused on getting us safely to Mars. It's a long journey. As they breached Earth's atmosphere, the vastness of space engulfed them. Talon watched in fascination as Brian's hands danced across the controls, making minute adjustments to their trajectory. Her antennae twitched, picking up on the subtle changes in the shuttle's vibrations. Hours into their journey, alarms suddenly blared through the cabin. Red warning lights flashed across the control panel as the shuttle began to shake violently. "Solar storm!" Brian shouted, his hands flying over the controls. "It wasn't on any of our forecasts. Hold on tight." Talon gripped her seat, her exoskeleton filled with tension. Through the viewport, she saw sheets of charged particles racing towards them, the deadly beauty of cosmic radiation painting the void in eerie colors. Brian's face was a mask of concentration as he wrestled with the controls. "The shielding systems are struggling," he muttered, more to himself than to Talon. "We need to change course, find a safe corridor through this mess." Talon watched in growing admiration as Brian's fingers flew across the navigation interface, plotting a new course in real time. The shuttle lurched and spun, narrowly avoiding the most intense areas of the storm. "Your piloting skills are impressive," Talon admitted, her voice tinged with surprise. Brian managed a tight smile. "Thanks. Let's hope they're impressive enough to get us through this alive." For what seemed like hours, Brian guided the shuttle through the treacherous solar winds. Talon found herself leaning forward, her compound eyes tracking every movement of Brian's hands, every flicker of data on the screens. The human's adaptability and quick thinking challenged everything she thought she knew about the species. Finally, the turbulence subsided. The alarms fell silent, and the red warning lights faded. Brian let out a long breath, his shoulders sagging with relief. "We made it," he said, turning to Talon with a weary smile. "How's that for human ingenuity?" Talon's mandibles clicked in what Brian had come to recognize as her version of a smile. "Perhaps I have underestimated your species' capabilities." As they approached the red planet, Talon pressed her face against the viewport, taking in the sight of the Mars colony. Vast domes stretched across the rusty landscape, interconnected by a web of tunnels and transport tubes. Fields of solar panels glinted in the weak Martian sunlight, while atmospheric processors towered in the distance, slowly transforming the alien world. They touched down on a landing pad near the main dome. As the airlock cycled, Talon felt a surge of anticipation. She was about to step foot on another world, one being reshaped by human hands. The inner door slid open, revealing a tall, distinguished-looking human with salt and pepper hair and a commanding presence. "Welcome to Mars," he said, his voice rich and charismatic. "I'm Governor Marcus Reeves. It's an honor to host you both." Brian stepped forward, shaking the governor's hand. "Thank you, sir. This is Talon, our esteemed guest from Nigeria. Reeves turned to Talon, his eyes sparkling with curiosity. Ah, our Nigerian visitor? I hope you'll find our humble colony enlightening. As they began their tour, Talon's senses were overwhelmed by the alien yet familiar environment. The air inside the dome was crisp and clean, carefully regulated by advanced filtration systems. Human colonists moved about their daily lives, their faces showing a mix of curiosity and caution at the sight of the Nigerian diplomat. Reeves led them through hydroponics gardens, where lush earth plants thrived under artificial sunlight. We're constantly improving our crop yields, he explained proudly. Soon we'll be entirely self-sufficient in food production. Talon observed the intricate irrigation systems and climate controls. Impressive, she admitted. Your species has adapted well to this hostile environment. As they continued their tour, Brian couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. He caught himself scanning faces in the crowd, wondering if any of them might be the mole Admiral Chen had warned him about. The weight of his secret mission pressed down on him, made heavier by his conflicting feelings for Talon. Later that evening, while Talon rested in her quarters, Brian slipped away to access the off-world database. His heart raced as he bypassed security protocols, knowing that discovery could mean the end of his career, or worse. As the classified data scrolled across his screen, Brian's blood ran cold. The information was damning. Detailed plans for the systematic draining of Earth's water resources, all to fuel Nigerian terraforming projects across the galaxy. At the center of it all was a name that made Brian's stomach churn: High Counselor Zix. Brian's mind reeled. How could he reconcile this information with the Talon he had come to know? The Nigerian who had worked alongside him to save the Mars colony from a life support malfunction just days ago. He remembered the incident vividly, alarms blaring, colonists panicking, and Talon calmly interfacing with the malfunctioning systems, her advanced knowledge complementing Brian's crisis management skills. Together, they had averted disaster, saving hundreds of lives. Now, as Brian stared at the damning evidence on his screen, he felt torn between his duty to Earth and his growing feelings for Talon. He knew he had to find a way to expose High Counselor Zix's plans without triggering an interstellar incident, or losing Talon's trust forever. As if on cue, his communicator chirped with an urgent message from Earth. Brian's heart sank as he read the news. Anti-alien protests were erupting worldwide, led by the firebrand Marcus Holt. The fragile peace between humans and aliens was unraveling fast. With a heavy heart, Brian realized their time on Mars had to be cut short. He needed to return to Earth immediately to navigate the treacherous waters of interspecies diplomacy and prevent a catastrophe. As he made his way back to Talon's quarters to break the news, Brian's mind raced. How could he protect Earth without betraying Talon's trust? And in the midst of this crisis, could he afford to explore the deepening connection between them? The red sands of Mars swirled outside the dome, indifferent to the personal and political storms brewing within. As Brian raised his hand to knock on Talon's door, he knew that the decisions he made in the coming days would shape the future of two worlds, and perhaps the fate of his own heart. Brian's squeezing hardened as he gripped the shuttle's controls, guiding the craft through Earth's atmosphere. Talon sat beside him, her compound eyes reflecting the swirling clouds as they descended. The tension in the cabin was palpable, a stark contrast to the awe they had shared on Mars just days ago. As they touched down at the Interstellar Relations Complex, a squad of armed guards surrounded the shuttle. Brian exchanged a concerned glance with Talon before lowering the ramp. "Ambassador Talon, Agent Reeves," a stern-faced officer greeted them. "Admiral Chen requires your immediate presence." They were escorted through bustling corridors, passing screens displaying news footage of riots in major cities. Humans and aliens clashed in the streets, their faces contorted with fear and anger. Talon's antennae twitched nervously as she absorbed the scenes of chaos. Admiral Helena Chen's office was a fortress of calm amidst the storm. The graying woman stood behind her desk, her posture rigid as she viewed a holographic display of global hotspots. "We're on the brink of a diplomatic catastrophe," Chen said without preamble. "The United Terran government is considering severing all ties with the Nigerians." Brian stepped forward, his voice low. Admiral, I have sensitive information regarding High Counselor Zix. Chen's eyes narrowed. Proceed. As Brian recounted his discoveries on Mars, Talon's mandibles clicked in agitation. She had been unaware of any such plans by her government. This is most disturbing, Chen muttered, but we need concrete evidence before we can act. Reeves, your new mission is to gather that proof. Turning to Talon, Chen's expression softened slightly. Ambassador, we need you to contact your embassy. Find out their official stance on this conflict. As they left the meeting, Brian's mind raced with the weight of his new assignment. How could he gather evidence without compromising his position or his relationship with Talon? Their contemplation was cut short by a commotion in the lobby. Marcus Holt, the firebrand politician, stood surrounded by cameras and supporters. There she is, Holt bellowed, pointing at Talon. The Nigen spy! Deport her now! Brian instinctively stepped in front of Talon, his body tensing. Stand down, Holt. You're out of line. Holt's face reddened. You dare defend this alien? She's a threat to our planet. Without warning, one of Holt's security guards lunged at Brian. Years of training kicked in as Brian deflected the attack, his movements fluid and precise. He disarmed the guard with a swift maneuver, sending the man sprawling. The lobby erupted into chaos. News drones buzzed overhead, capturing every moment of the altercation. Brian grabbed Talon's arm, guiding her through the melee towards the exit. We need to get you somewhere safe, he said, his voice tight with urgency. They sprinted to Brian's personal vehicle, a sleek hover car parked in a secure bay. As they sped away from the complex, Talon's normally steady voice quavered. Where are we going? Brian's eyes remained fixed on the road ahead. My family has a cabin in the Rocky Mountains. It's isolated, defensible. We'll be safe there while we figure out our next move. The journey was tense, with Brian constantly checking for pursuit. As they entered a small town for supplies, a group of protesters recognized Talon through the vehicle's windows. Alien scum! One shouted, hurling a rock that cracked the windshield. Brian didn't hesitate. He threw the car into reverse, executing a perfect J-turn that left the protesters in a cloud of dust. Talon watched in fascination as Brian's hands moved with precision, weaving through back alleys and side streets until they were clear of the town. Your species continues to surprise me, Talon said softly. Your adaptability, your protection. Brian allowed himself a small smile. It's not just about adaptability, it's about doing what's right. The cabin stood alone in a clearing, surrounded by towering pines. As they entered, Brian activated the security systems, a mix of cutting-edge technology and old-fashioned defenses. Inside, the rustic interior belied the sophisticated equipment hidden throughout. Brian gave Talon a quick tour before settling into the main room, his body finally relaxing slightly. We should be safe here for now, he said, running a hand through his hair. Talon moved to the window, her compound eyes taking in the unfamiliar landscape. Your world has such varied beauty, she mused, so different from the uniform cities of Nigeria. Brian joined her, standing close enough that he could sense the alien warmth radiating from her exoskeleton. Talon, there's something I need to tell you. Before he could continue, a priority alert flashed on his communicator. Brian's heart raced as he read the encrypted message from a Nigene named Lyra, claiming to have crucial information about High Counselor Zix. We need to go, Brian said, his voice tight. There's a Nigean defector who wants to meet us at an abandoned space station. Talon's antennae quivered with surprise. A defector? But why? Her question was cut off by another alert, this one broadcast on all frequencies. The United Terran government had issued an order for all Nigeans on Earth to be detained for questioning. Brian's eyes hardened. We're out of time. We need to get to that space station now. They raced to a hidden hangar where a small spacecraft waited, prepped for just such an emergency. As Brian ran through the pre-flight checklist, Talon interfaced with the ship's systems, her advanced knowledge complementing his piloting skills. The craft streaked into the night sky, evading the increased security patrols with a combination of stealth technology and Brian's expert maneuvering. As Earth shrunk behind them, The looming form of the abandoned space station came into view. "Brian," Talon said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "whatever we discover up there, I want you to know that my time with you has changed me, changed how I see your species." Brian turned to her, his expression a mix of willpower and conflict. "Talon, His words were cut short as the ship's sensors blared a warning. Multiple unidentified vessels were converging on the space station. "It's a trap," Brian realized, his hands flying over the controls. But it was too late to turn back. The small craft docked with the station, the airlock cycling with an ominous hiss. As the inner door prepared to open, Brian and Talon shared a look of uncertainty, their personal feelings momentarily overshadowed by the gravity of what awaited them. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance as the airlock door slowly slid open, revealing the shadowy interior of the station. Whatever lay beyond would test not only their loyalties, but the very foundation of human-Nigean relations. The airlock hissed open, revealing a dimly lit corridor stretching before them. Brian's hand instinctively moved to his sidearm as he stepped forward, Talon close behind. "Stay alert," he whispered, his eyes scanning the shadows. "Something's not right here." They moved silently through the station, their footsteps echoing in the eerie stillness. Signs of recent activity were everywhere. Discarded food containers, hastily moved equipment, and the lingering scent of unfamiliar chemicals. As they approached the designated meeting point, a cacophony of sounds erupted from around the corner. The distinctive whine of energy weapons mixed with shouts and the crash of falling debris. Brian pressed himself against the wall, motioning for Talon to do the same. He inched forward, peering around the corner. The scene that greeted him was chaos incarnate. A group of Nigeans, their exoskeletons gleaming under the emergency lights, were engaged in a fierce firefight with another faction. At the center of the rebel group stood a tall, lithe Nigean, who could only be Lyra, the defector. "Looks like we walked into the middle of an internal struggle," Brian muttered. Talon's antennae twitched. "Those are Zix's loyalists," she hissed, indicating the opposing force. "We must help Lyra." Without hesitation, Brian sprung into action. He dove into the fray, his military training taking over. In one fluid motion, he disarmed a loyalist, using the alien's own weapon against his comrades. Talon joined the fight, her advanced Nigean reflexes complementing Brian's combat skills. Together, they carved a path through the loyalists, pushing them back and giving Lyra's group the advantage they needed. Brian's mind raced as he fought, analyzing patterns and predicting movements. He noticed a loyalist taking aim at Lyra and reacted instantly, tackling the Nigean to the ground and neutralizing the threat. Lyra's compound eyes widened in surprise. "You fight with the skill of a seasoned Nigean warrior," she said, her voice filled with newfound respect. The battle raged on, but the tide had turned. Brian's quick thinking and adaptability, combined with Talon's insider knowledge of Nigean tactics, proved to be the decisive factor. The loyalists, outmaneuvered and outgunned, began to retreat. As the last of Zix's forces fell back, one managed to reach a communication panel. A high-pitched signal echoed through the station before Brian could stop him. "Distress beacon," Talon said grimly. "We don't have much time." In the aftermath of the skirmish, Lyra approached Brian and Talon. Her exoskeleton bore the marks of battle, but her posture radiated willpower. "I thank you for your assistance," she said, "but now we must act quickly. The information I have is vital to the survival of both our species." Lyra produced a data crystal, its surface glowing with an otherworldly light. "This contains evidence of Zix's true plans. He intends to use a terraforming device on Earth, altering its atmosphere to suit Nigean physiology." Talon recoiled in shock. "But that would make the planet uninhabitable for humans." Brian's eyebrows furrowed. "We need to get this information to Earth immediately." Before they could formulate a plan, the station's sensors blared to life. Multiple Nigean warships were rapidly approaching their position. Brian's mind raced, considering and discarding options in seconds. His eyes fell on an old schematic of the station, and a desperate plan began to form. "The mass driver," he said, pointing to an outdated but still functional electromagnetic launch system. We can use it to propel our craft back to Earth at speeds the Nigean ships can't match. Lyra's antenna twitched with uncertainty. The forces involved would be extreme. We might not survive. It's our only chance, Brian insisted. He turned to Talon, their eyes meeting in a moment of unspoken understanding. Are you with me? Talon hesitated for a fraction of a second, her compound eyes reflecting the conflict within. Then, with a decisiveness that surprised even her, she nodded. I am with you, Brian, to protect Earth and its people. They raced against time, preparing their small craft for the risky journey. Brian and Talon worked in perfect synchronization, their movements a fluid dance of human intuition and Nigean precision. As they loaded the crucial evidence aboard, the station shuddered. Zix's forces had begun their assault. We're out of time, Lyra warned, sealing the craft's hatch behind them. Brian took the pilot's seat, his hands flying over the controls. Talon interfaced directly with the ship's systems, her advanced knowledge allowing her to make split-second adjustments. The mass driver hummed to life, energy building to astronomical levels. Through the view screen, Brian could see Nigean soldiers breaching the control room. Now or never, he growled, slamming his hand down on the launch initiator. The world outside became a blur as the electromagnetic forces catapulted them into space. The acceleration was brutal, pushing the limits of both human and Nigean physiology. Brian fought to remain conscious, his trained reflexes the only thing keeping their trajectory true. Talon's exoskeleton creaked under the strain, but she maintained her link with the ship's systems, making constant micro-adjustments to their course. As they hurtled through the void, evading the grasping tendrils of Nigean tractor beams, Talon found her perspective shifting. The sight of Earth growing larger in their viewport, coupled with Brian's unwavering dedication to protect both their peoples, awakened something profound within her. Their speed was unprecedented, the heat of atmospheric entry building rapidly around them. Warning klaxons blared as the ship's hull began to glow cherry red. We're coming in too hot, Brian grunted, fighting the controls. Talon's mind raced, drawing on knowledge she didn't even know she possessed. Adjust our entry vector by 0.3 degrees, she instructed. It will create a pocket of cooler air around us. Brian complied without hesitation, trusting Talon implicitly. The ship shuddered but held together as they plummeted towards the surface. Just as it seemed they might burn up, Admiral Chen's voice crackled over the comm system. Reeves, we've got a situation down here. Marcus Holt is pushing for immediate action against all Nigeans on Earth. We need that evidence now. Brian's grip tightened on the controls. Understood, Admiral. We're inbound to New Washington, D.C. Have a medical team standing by. The ground rushed up to meet them as Brian fought for control. Talon braced herself, her compound eyes fixed on the human beside her. In that moment, she knew that whatever happened next, her fate was inexorably linked with his, and with the future of Earth itself. The craft screamed towards the outskirts of the city, the fate of two worlds hanging in the balance as Brian prepared for a landing that would test the very limits of his skill and willpower. His skill and experience. The craft slammed into the ground with bone-jarring force, skidding across the outskirts of New Washington, D.C. Metal screamed and sparks flew as the ship carved a deep furrow into the earth before finally coming to a stop. Brian's head swam as he fought to regain his senses. He tasted blood in his mouth and felt a sharp pain in his ribs. Beside him, Talon's exoskeleton had absorbed much of the impact, but she still appeared dazed. Lyra? Brian called out, his voice hoarse. Functional, came the reply from the back of the ship. But we must hurry. Brian nodded, wincing at the movement. He hit the emergency release and the craft's hatch blew open with a hiss of escaping pressure. Acrid smoke poured into the cabin. The evidence, Talon said, her antennae twitching with urgency. Brian reached for the data crystal, his fingers closing around it just as a secondary explosion rocked the ship. Time to go! They scrambled out of the wreckage, Lyra clutching her side where a piece of shrapnel had pierced her exoskeleton. In the distance, sirens wailed as emergency services responded to their crash landing. We can't wait for them, Brian said, his military training kicking in. We need to get to the UTG headquarters now. They set off at a brisk pace, the gleaming spires of New Washington, D.C. looming before them. As they entered the city proper, the streets became increasingly crowded. People pointed and stared at the two Nigeans, their expressions a mix of fear and hostility. "Something's not right," Talon observed, her compound eyes scanning the growing throng. As they rounded a corner, they were confronted by a massive crowd filling the main boulevard. Angry voices filled the air, punctuated by the crash of breaking glass. "Anti-alien protesters," Brian growled, recognizing the inflammatory slogans on their signs. "Holt's been busy." They tried to skirt the edge of the crowd, but their presence didn't go unnoticed for long. A shout went up, and suddenly all eyes were on them. "Nigen scum!" someone yelled, hurling a bottle that shattered at Talon's feet. The crowd surged forward, a seething mass of hatred and fear. Brian stepped in front of Talon and Lyra, his combat training taking over. He deflected the first punch thrown his way, using the attacker's momentum to send him sprawling into his fellow protesters. "We're not your enemy," Brian shouted, but his words were lost in the roar of the mob. A burly man swung a makeshift club at Talon. Brian intercepted it, wrenching the weapon away and using it to create space around them. His movements were fluid and precise, a stark contrast to the wild swings of the untrained mob. Overhead, news drones buzzed, their cameras capturing every moment of the confrontation. The sight of a human defending Nigeans against his own kind was beamed across the globe in real time. "This way," Lyra called out, pointing to a side street. They broke away from the crowd, sprinting down the narrow alley. Behind them, the sound of pursuing footsteps echoed off the buildings. As they emerged onto a wider street, Brian spotted a military checkpoint ahead. He reached for his ID, praying it would still grant him access. "Halt!" a guard shouted, raising his weapon. Brian held up his hands, his ID clearly visible. "Commander Brian Reeves, Special Operations. I have critical information for Admiral Chen. We need to get inside now." The guard's eyes widened in recognition. He hesitated for a moment, glancing at the two Nigeans, before nodding sharply. "Follow me, quickly." They were ushered through a series of security checkpoints, each more stringent than the last. Finally, they found themselves outside the main chamber where the emergency session was being held. Brian could hear raised voices through the door. He recognized Admiral Chen's authoritative tone, countered by a strident voice he assumed belonged to Marcus Holt. "Ready?" he asked, looking at Talon and Lyra. They nodded, their alien features set with grit. Brian took a deep breath and pushed open the doors. The chamber fell silent as all eyes turned to the newcomers. "What is the meaning of this?" Marcus Holt demanded, his face flushing with anger. "Guards, arrest those aliens immediately." "Belay that order," Admiral Chen countered, her sharp gaze taking in Brian's battered appearance. "Commander Reeves, report." Brian stepped forward, holding up the data crystal. "Admiral, we have evidence of High Counselor Zix's true intentions. He plans to use a terraforming device on Earth, making it uninhabitable for humans." Gasps and murmurs filled the chamber. Marcus Holt's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "Preposterous," he spluttered. "This is clearly a Nigean ploy to divide us." Brian inserted the data crystal into a nearby console. The room's holographic display flickered to life, showing detailed schematics of the terraforming device and its catastrophic effects on Earth's atmosphere. As the assembly digested the information, Marcus Holt's eyes narrowed. "Even if this is true, it only proves that all Nigeans are a threat. I move that we detain every alien on Earth, starting with these two." He pointed accusingly at Talon and Lyra. Talon stepped forward, her antennae quivering with emotion. "I am Talon, formerly of the Nigean Diplomatic Corps. I hereby renounce my loyalty to the current Nigean government and pledge my aid to humanity in resisting Zix's invasion plans." Her words, broadcast live across the planet, sent shockwaves through the assembly. Admiral Chen nodded approvingly, while Marcus Holt sputtered in disbelief. "We don't have time for this political maneuvering," Brian interjected. "Admiral, we need to mobilize Earth's defenses immediately. Zix could launch his attack at any moment." Admiral Chen's expression hardened. "Agreed. Commander Reeves, I'm tasking you with leading a special operations team to infiltrate and disable that terraforming device. Can I count on you? Brian straightened, ignoring the pain in his ribs. Yes, ma'am. We volunteer to join the mission, Talon said, gesturing to herself and Lyra. Our knowledge of Nigean technology and tactics could prove invaluable. Before Admiral Chen could respond, an aide burst into the room. Admiral, we've intercepted a transmission. Zix has taken control of our Mars and lunar colonies. He's using the civilians as hostages. The room erupted into chaos. Brian's mind raced, already adjusting their plans to account for this new complication. He caught Talon's eye, seeing his own mix of willpower and concern reflected in her alien features. Admiral Chen raised her voice above the din. Commander Reeves, your mission parameters have changed. You must disable the terraforming device and rescue those hostages. But understand this. Officially, this mission does not exist. If you're captured, we will disavow all knowledge of your actions. Brian nodded grimly. Understood, Admiral. We'll get it done. As the room buzzed with activity, Brian pulled Talon aside. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the weight of their shared experiences and the looming danger hanging between them. Talon, Brian began, struggling to find the right words. I know, Talon replied softly, her antennae gently brushing his cheek. Whatever happens, we face it together. Their moment was interrupted by Lyra. The stealth ship is ready. We need to move now. Brian nodded, his determination strengthened by Talon's presence. They made their way to the landing pad where a sleek black ship waited. A small team of human special forces was already boarding. As they prepared for launch, reports came in of Nigean ships approaching Earth orbit. The terraforming device had been detected among the fleet. Brian took his place in the pilot's seat, Talon beside him as co-pilot. As the ship's engines hummed to life, he allowed himself one last look at the planet below. Everything he had ever known, everyone he had ever cared for, hung in the balance. Course set for the Nigean fleet, Talon announced, her voice steady despite the enormity of their task. Brian engaged the stealth systems, and the ship rose silently into the night sky. As they accelerated towards orbit, he knew that the fate of two civilizations rested on their shoulders. They had to succeed not only in stopping Zix, but in showing both humans and Nigeans that coexistence was possible. The stars stretched into lines as they pushed to maximum speed. Ahead lay the Nigean fleet, and with it, a confrontation that would shape the future of both their species. The stealth ship sliced through the inky void, its experimental cloaking technology rendering it invisible to Nigean sensors. Brian's hands flew over the controls, making minute adjustments to their approach vector. We're entering the outer perimeter of the fleet, Talon announced, her compound eyes fixed on the sensor readouts. No sign of detection yet. Brian nodded, allowing himself a small breath of relief. Let's hope it stays that way. Can you pinpoint Zix's command ship? Talon's antenna twitched as she analyzed the data streaming across her display. After a tense moment, she pointed to a massive vessel at the heart of the Nigean formation. There, that's the Vortex Spear, Zix's personal flagship. As they drew closer, the sheer scale of the Nigean fleet became apparent. Hundreds of ships hung in the void, their sleek forms overflowing with weapons. At the center, the Vortex Spear loomed like a predator among prey, easily twice the size of the next largest vessel. I'm detecting a high-energy signature from the Vortex Spear, Lyra reported from her station. Consistent with the terraforming device. Brian's mind focused. Then that's our target. Talon, you mentioned a maintenance hatch? Yes, Talon confirmed. It's rarely used and minimally guarded, our best chance for undetected entry. With practiced precision, Brian guided their ship towards the behemoth. As they approached, the maintenance hatch came into view, a small blemish on the Vortex Spear's otherwise smooth hull. Docking in 3, 2, 1. Brian counted down as he eased the ship into position. There was a soft thud as the magnetic seals engaged, creating an airtight connection between the two vessels. Brian turned to address his team, a mix of human special forces and the two Nigean defectors. This is it. We split into two teams as planned. Alpha team with me and Talon, we take out the terraforming device. Beta team with Lyra. Free the hostages. Questions? A human soldier raised his hand. Sir, how do we know we can trust them? He jerked his head towards Talon and Lyra. Brian met the soldier's gaze steadily. Because without them, we wouldn't have made it this far. They've risked everything to help us. That's good enough for me. The soldier nodded, chastened. Brian continued. Comms check. Keep radio silence unless absolutely necessary. Sync watches. We rendezvous back here in 90 minutes. Let's move. The team split up as they entered the Vortex Sphere. Brian led Alpha Team through a maze of corridors, relying on Talon's knowledge of Nigean ship design to navigate. They encountered their first resistance at a security checkpoint. Brian signaled his team to take cover as he assessed the situation. 4 Nigean guards, heavily armed. Before he could formulate a plan, Talon touched his arm. Allow me, she whispered. Then, to Brian's astonishment, she stepped out into full view of the guards. The Nigeans raised their weapons, but hesitated at the sight of one of their own. Talon began speaking rapidly in her native language, her antennae moving in complex patterns. The guards lowered their weapons, clearly confused. In a flash, Brian understood her plan. He signaled his team, and they burst from cover. The distracted guards were swiftly and silently neutralized. What did you say to them? Brian asked as they dragged the unconscious Nigeans out of sight. Talon's mandibles clicked in what Brian had come to recognize as a smile. I told them I was here to perform an unscheduled inspection. It seems my old diplomatic credentials still carry some weight. They pressed on, encountering sporadic resistance. Each time, the combination of Brian's tactical acumen and Talon's inside knowledge proved devastating. They bypassed security systems, circumvented patrols, and steadily made their way towards the ship's central chamber. Meanwhile, Lyra's team faced challenges of a different sort. They located the holding cells where the human hostages were kept, only to find the situation more complex than anticipated. As Lyra worked to override the cell door controls, she could hear heated arguments from within. When the doors slid open, they revealed a scene of chaos. Some hostages rushed towards their rescuers with relief, while others hung back, eyeing the human soldiers with suspicion. A middle-aged woman stepped forward, placing herself between Lyra's team and the reluctant hostages. We don't want to leave, she declared. The Nigeans have shown us a better way of life. We want to stay and learn from them. Lyra's team exchanged bewildered glances. This was a complication they hadn't prepared for. Lyra realized she would need to adapt her approach. I understand your feelings, Lyra began, her voice gentle but firm. But right now, Earth is in danger. We need every voice to speak up for peace between our species. You can do more good by coming with us and sharing your experiences with those who fear the Nigeans. Her words seemed to sway some of the holdouts, but others remained unconvinced. Time was running short, and Lyra knew they couldn't force the issue without risking violence. Back in the central chamber, Brian and Talon faced their greatest challenge yet. The terraforming device loomed before them, a massive construct of alien technology. Between them and their target stood a platoon of Zix's elite guards. Brian assessed the situation grimly. A frontal assault would be suicide. They needed a diversion. Talon, he whispered, if I can draw their fire, do you think you can reach the control panel? Talon's compound eyes fixed on the device, calculating. Yes, she replied. But Brian, the risk is necessary, he finished. On my mark. Before Talon could protest further, Brian burst from cover. He unleashed a barrage of suppressing fire, rolling and diving to present a moving target. The elite guards, caught off guard by the audacity of the attack, turned their attention to the human intruder. Seizing the opportunity, Talon darted towards the terraforming device. Her agile form weaved through the chaos, her multiple limbs allowing her to traverse the alien machinery with ease. She reached the control panel and began the complex shutdown sequence. Brian's luck couldn't last forever. A Nigean energy blast grazed his arm, sending him sprawling. He looked up to see a towering figure emerge from the smoke. High Counselor Zix himself. Foolish human, Zix snarled, his mandibles clicking menacingly. Did you really think you could stop the inevitable? Brian struggled to his feet, ignoring the searing pain in his arm. It's not inevitable, he grunted. Not as long as there are people willing to stand against you. Zix lunged forward, his powerful limbs giving him a distinct advantage in close combat. Brian ducked and weaved, relying on his human agility to stay just out of reach. But Zix's relentless assault drove Brian back, step by step. At the control panel, Talon worked feverishly, her multiple limbs flying over the complex interface. She was aware of the pitched battle behind her, but forced herself to focus on the task at hand. The fate of Earth depended on her success. A thunderous blow from Zix sent Brian crashing into a bank of equipment. The Nigean leader loomed over him, mandibles spread wide in a victorious snarl. Your resistance ends here, human, Zix hissed, raising a clawed hand for the killing blow. Suddenly, a blur of motion intercepted Zix's strike. Talon had abandoned her post at the control panel, throwing herself into the fray. Her smaller form darted around Zix, striking at vulnerable points in his exoskeleton that only another Nigean would know. Brian seized the moment to regain his footing. Together, he and Talon pressed their attack. Human and Nigean moved in perfect synchronization, their shared experiences forging them into a formidable team. Zix, for all his power, found himself overwhelmed by the unlikely duo. A precise strike from Talon to a nerve cluster in his abdomen sent the High Counselor crashing to the ground. As Brian secured their prisoner, Talon rushed back to the control panel. With a final series of commands, the terraforming device powered down, its ominous hum fading to silence. It's done, Talon announced, her voice thick with relief and exhaustion. Brian allowed himself a moment to catch his breath before activating his comm unit. Lyra, status report. Lyra's voice crackled through the speaker. Most hostages secured, but we have a situation. Some have chosen to remain with the Nigeans. We're en route to the rendezvous point now. Copy that, Brian replied. We have Zix in custody and the device is neutralized. Let's get out of here. As they made their way back to their ship, half carrying, half dragging the unconscious Zix, Brian's comm unit chirped again. Admiral Chen's voice filled the air, tense with urgency. Commander Reeves, be advised. Zix's actions have caused a political firestorm on the Nigean homeworld. A significant faction is calling for peace talks with Earth. Brian exchanged a hopeful glance with Talon, but the Admiral wasn't finished. However, the situation here is deteriorating. Marcus Holt has used recent events to push his anti-alien agenda. He's gained significant support for expelling all Nigeans from Earth and launching a preemptive strike against their homeworld. The implications hit Brian like a physical blow. They had won the battle, but the war for peace was just the beginning. As they boarded their ship, human hostages and Nigean prisoners in tow, he realized that the real challenge lay ahead. The viewport filled with the blue curve of Earth as they began their approach. Brian turned to Talon, seeing his own mix of emotions reflected in her alien features. They had come so far, risked so much. Now they would have to navigate the treacherous waters of interspecies politics to ensure their hard-won victory wasn't in vain. As the ship entered Earth's atmosphere, Brian squared his shoulders. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain. He and Talon would face them together. Together as allies and friends. As their ship touched down on the tarmac of a heavily guarded military base, Brian saw the sea of flashing cameras and eager reporters held back by a line of stern-faced security personnel. The world was watching, waiting to see the aliens who had nearly destroyed their planet. Ready? Brian asked, turning to Talon. She nodded, her compound eyes reflecting the chaos outside. As I'll ever be. The ship's ramp lowered with a hiss, and Brian led the way, flanked by Talon and 2 human soldiers, escorting the bound form of High Counselor Zix. The moment they appeared, the crowd erupted into a frenzy of shouts and camera flashes. Commander Reeves, is it true you stopped an alien invasion? What is that device behind you? Are there more aliens coming? The questions came fast and furious, but Brian kept his face neutral as he guided his team through the throng. Admiral Helena Chen met them halfway, her crisp uniform a stark contrast to their battle-worn appearance. Well done, Commander, she said, her voice low. But I'm afraid our work is just beginning. Follow me. They were whisked away to a secure briefing room where the highest-ranking members of the United Terran government awaited. The tension in the air was palpable as Brian and Talon recounted their mission, presenting evidence of Zix's planned invasion and the disabled terraforming device. As they spoke, Brian noticed the reactions around the room. Some faces showed shock and outrage, others fear, and a few, worryingly, a gleam of opportunity. One of those belonged to Marcus Holt, the vocal anti-alien senator who had been gaining support in recent months. "This is precisely what I've been warning about," Holt exclaimed, smacking his head on the table. "We've welcomed these aliens into our cities, our schools, even our homes. And look how they repay us with attempted genocide." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room, and Brian felt a knot form in his stomach. He glanced at Talon, seeing the distress in her antennae's subtle movements. "Senator," Brian interjected, his voice firm, "with all due respect, you're oversimplifying a complex situation. Yes, High Counselor Zix and his followers posed a grave threat, but it was Nigeans like Talon and Lyra who made our mission possible. Without their help, we would have failed, and Earth might be uninhabitable right now." Holt scoffed. "And we're supposed to just take your word for it? How do we know this isn't some elaborate ruse?" An idea struck Brian. "You don't have to take my word for it," he said. "Let the world see for themselves. I propose we hold a public trial for High Counselor Zix, broadcast live on Earth and the Nigean homeworld." The room erupted into a cacophony of voices. Admiral Chen raised her hand for silence. "Elaborate, Commander," she said, her eyes narrowed in consideration. Brian laid out his plan, emphasizing the opportunity to demonstrate transparency and interspecies cooperation. As he spoke, he could see the idea gaining traction with some of the officials, while others, Holt chief among them, looked increasingly agitated. "This is unprecedented," the Secretary of Global Security mused. "The security risks alone, which is why we'll implement the strictest possible measures," Brian countered. "But think of the potential benefits. This could be a turning point in human-Nigean relations." The debate raged for hours, but eventually a consensus was reached. The trial would proceed, with Brian and his team tasked with overseeing security and preparation. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Brian worked tirelessly, coordinating with human and Nigean authorities, organizing security details, and preparing for every possible contingency. Through it all, Talon was by his side, her insights into Nigean culture proving invaluable. As the trial date approached, the atmosphere on Earth grew increasingly tense. Marcus Holt had intensified his anti-alien rhetoric, organizing massive protests outside the specially constructed courthouse. Brian watched from a security monitor as thousands of people waved signs with slogans like "Earth for Humans" and "Aliens Go Home." "This isn't looking good," he muttered, rubbing his tired eyes. Talon placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "We knew it wouldn't be easy," she said, "but we have to believe that truth and justice will prevail." Brian nodded, but before he could respond, his comm unit buzzed urgently. The voice of his security chief crackled through. "Commander, we've intercepted a transmission. There's a credible threat against Talon's life. Zix loyalists are planning to take her out before she can testify." Brian's blood ran cold. He turned to Talon, seeing the fear she tried to hide behind her alien features. "We need to move you to a secure location," he said, already heading for the door. "I'll oversee your protection personally." As they hurried through the building's winding corridors, Brian's mind raced. He had known the risks, but the reality of the danger Talon faced hit him hard. The thought of losing her made his chest tighten in a way he wasn't entirely prepared for. They reached a reinforced safe room, and Brian ushered Talon inside. As the heavy door sealed behind them, they found themselves alone in the small Spartan space. "I'm sorry about this," Brian said, gesturing to their surroundings. "I know it's not ideal, but it's the safest place for you, right now." Talon's antennae twitched in what Brian had come to recognize as a sign of amusement. "I've endured far worse conditions, Brian. Besides, the company more than makes up for the accommodations." Their eyes met, and suddenly the small room felt even smaller. The tension that had been building between them, pushed aside by the constant demands of their mission, now surged to the forefront. Brian took a step closer. Talon, A loud bang from outside made them both jump. Brian's hand flew to his weapon as he positioned himself between Talon and the door. Tense seconds ticked by before his comm unit crackled to life. False alarm, sir, his security chief reported. Just some protesters getting rowdy. The situation is under control. Brian let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He turned back to Talon, seeing his own mix of relief and lingering adrenaline mirrored in her alien eyes. We should rest, he said, his voice rougher than he intended. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. As they settled in for the night, Brian's mind whirled with thoughts of the trial ahead, the threats they faced, and the alien who had somehow become so important to him. He knew that the coming days would test them in ways they couldn't imagine, but looking at Talon's sleeping form, he felt a flicker of hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The morning of the trial dawned bright and tense. Brian stood at the courthouse steps, surveying the massive crowd that had gathered. Supporters and protesters alike jostled for position, their chants and shouts creating a deafening cacophony. As the armored transport carrying High Counselor Zix approached, Brian touched his earpiece. All units, be ready. This is it. Go, Brian commanded. The security teams moved into position as the transport came to a stop. High Counselor Zix, his exoskeleton dull and his movement sluggish, was led from the vehicle. A chorus of boos and angry shouts erupted from the crowd. Brian felt Talon tense beside him. Stay calm, he murmured. We've prepared for this. The trial proceeded over the following weeks, broadcast live across Earth and the Nigean homeworld. Brian and Talon worked tirelessly, coordinating security, managing witnesses, and providing crucial testimony. On the final day, as the verdict was read, Brian held his breath. High Counselor Zix, this court finds you guilty of attempted genocide and crimes against both humanity and the Nigean people. The courtroom erupted. Brian's eyes met Talon's, relief evident in both their expressions. But their work was just getting started. In the months that followed, Brian and Talon found themselves at the center of a new initiative. The United Terran government, working with the newly formed Nigean Interim Council, established the Earth Nigean Diplomatic Corps. Brian and Talon were appointed as co-chairs. Their first major project was ambitious, a joint human-Nigean space exploration program. Brian stood before a mixed audience of humans and Nigeans, outlining their vision. By combining our technologies and expertise, we can reach further into the cosmos than ever before, he explained. Our goal is to discover new habitable worlds, ensuring a future for both our species. The program gained traction quickly, but not without opposition. Marcus Holt, though diminished in influence after the trial, continued his anti-alien rhetoric. These joint projects are nothing more than a Trojan horse, Holt declared at a rally. The Nigeans are infiltrating our society at the highest levels. Brian tried to ignore the vitriol, focusing instead on his work with Talon. Their partnership deepened as they navigated the complexities of interspecies diplomacy. Late nights poring over star charts and early mornings in cultural sensitivity, briefings brought them closer than ever. One evening, as they stood on the balcony of the Diplomatic Corps headquarters, Talon turned to Brian. Do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing? She asked, her antennae quivering slightly. Brian considered the question. Every day, he admitted. But then I look at what we've accomplished, how far we've come. It has to be worth it. Talon's compound eyes seemed to soften. She reached out, her hand brushing against Brian's. The moment was interrupted by a piercing alarm. Security breach, a voice shouted over the comm system. Protect the ambassadors. Brian's training kicked in. He grabbed Talon and pulled her down just as a plasma burst scorched the wall behind them. Security forces swarmed the area, engaging the attackers. In the chaos, Brian spotted a figure taking aim at Talon. Without hesitation, he threw himself in front of her. Pain exploded in his shoulder as the shot connected. Brian? Talon's voice was the last thing he heard before darkness took him. He awoke in a specialized medical facility, his body aching but alive. Talon sat beside him, her exoskeleton bearing marks of the attack. You saved my life, she said softly. Brian tried to sit up, wincing at the pain. We're partners. It's what we do. As Brian recovered, he dove into the investigation of the attack. The evidence led him down a rabbit hole of conspiracy and corruption. He uncovered a shadow organization called Purity Front, composed of both human and Nigerian extremists opposed to integration. They've infiltrated both governments, Brian explained to Admiral Chen, his voice hushed. The corruption goes all the way to the top. Chen's face darkened. This could undo everything we've worked for. If this gets out... I know, Brian nodded, but we can't ignore it. The fate of both our species depends on rooting out this threat. As Brian delved deeper into the conspiracy, Talon focused on their diplomatic duties. Her public appearances became symbols of resilience and cooperation. Human and Nigerian medical experts collaborated on her treatment, pushing the boundaries of both species' knowledge. Months passed. Brian's investigation led him to a remote outpost on one of Saturn's moons. Intelligence suggested this was where Purity Front was developing a bioweapon designed to target individuals predisposed to interspecies cooperation. We have to move now, Brian insisted to the joint human-Nigerian strike team. Every moment we wait puts more lives at risk. The infiltration of the outpost was a masterclass in interspecies cooperation. Brian's tactical expertise combined seamlessly with the Nigerians' advanced technology. They navigated through laser grids and neutralized guard patrols with precision. As they approached the central lab, Brian and Talon took point. They burst through the doors, weapons raised, only to find themselves face-to-face with the leaders of Purity Front, a grizzled human general and a Nigerian scientist with scarred exoskeleton. You're too late, the general sneered. The weapon is already... An alarm blared, cutting him off. Red lights flashed as a computerized voice announced, Bioweapon deployment initiated. Ventilation system compromised in T-5 minutes. Brian and Talon exchanged a glance. Without a word, they sprang into action. Brian engaged the guards while Talon raced to the control panel. The system's encrypted, Talon called out, her fingers flying over the alien interface. I need more time. We don't have it, Brian grunted, dodging a plasma burst. He looked around frantically, spotting a maintenance hatch. The ventilation system, we need to shut it down manually. They fought their way to the hatch, descending into a maze of ducts and pipes. The confined space was a challenge for both of them. Too tight for Brian's bulky human frame, too warm for Talon's exoskeleton. But they pressed on, compensating for each other's limitations. With seconds to spare, they reached the main control valve. Together, human and Nigerian strength combined to wrench it shut. The hiss of air stopped, and with it, the threat of the bioweapon's release. Exhausted but victorious, Brian and Talon made their way back to the main lab. The Purity Front leaders and their guards were secured, and the strike team was already gathering evidence. As they prepared to return to Earth, Brian's comm unit crackled to life. Admiral Chen's voice came through, tense and urgent. Commander, we have a situation. Marcus Holt has staged a coup. He's taken control of key government institutions and is rallying support for a strike against the Nigerian homeworld. You need to get back here now. Brian looked at Talon, seeing his own shock and perseverance mirrored in her alien features. They had won this battle, but the war for peace was just the beginning. As their ship broke Saturn's orbit, setting course for Earth, Brian knew that their greatest challenge still lay ahead. Brian's mind raced as their ship hurtled through space towards Earth. The enormity of Marcus Holt's coup threatened to overwhelm him, but he forced himself to focus. He turned to Talon, her alien features set in unyielding commitment. We need a plan, he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. If Holt's taken control of the government, we can't just waltz in there. Talon's antenna twitched in agreement. The evidence we gathered on Saturn's moon, she said. If we can broadcast it widely enough, it might turn the tide of public opinion. Brian nodded, already reaching for the ship's communication array. We'll need to hack into the major news networks. Can you do it? Talon's compound eyes glinted. With my eyes closed, she replied, her fingers flying over the alien interface. As they entered Earth's atmosphere, Talon's work paid off. Screens across the planet flickered, then filled with damning evidence of Holt's connection to Purity Front. Citizens watched in shock as the true extent of the conspiracy unfolded before their eyes. The ship touched down in New Washington, D.C., amidst a cacophony of angry shouts and chants. Protesters filled the streets, their signs denouncing Holt's regime. Brian and Talon emerged to find Admiral Chen waiting for them, flanked by a group of loyal military and law enforcement personnel. "Good to see you, Commander," Chen said, his face etched with worry. "We've got a fight on our hands." Brian surveyed the chaotic scene. "What's our status?" Chen grimaced. "Holt's forces have taken the United Terran Government headquarters and the Earth Defense Command Center. We're organizing to take them back, but it won't be easy." "I'll lead the strike on the UTG HQ," Brian said, already formulating a plan. "Talon, I need you to work with the Admiral. Use your skills to gather intel and coordinate our efforts." Talon nodded, her exoskeleton gleaming in the sunlight. "Be careful, Brian," she said softly. Minutes later, Brian found himself crouched behind a makeshift barricade, the imposing facade of the UTG headquarters looming before him. He signaled to his strike team, a mix of seasoned soldiers and local law enforcement who'd rejected Holt's coup. "Remember," he said, his voice low and intense, "we're here to retake the building, not destroy it, minimize collateral damage, and watch for civilians." They moved in, encountering heavy resistance from Holt's supporters. The sound of plasma weapons and conventional firearms filled the air as Brian led his team through the building's winding corridors. He ducked and weaved, using every bit of cover available, his combat instincts honed by years of experience. In his ear, Talon's voice provided crucial information. "Brian, I've accessed the building's security systems. There's a group of hostiles 2 corridors ahead, guarding the main server room." Brian signaled his team to hold position. "Can you give us an advantage?" "Initiating a power surge to overload their weapons. Now!" The lights flickered and Brian heard shouts of confusion. He surged forward, his team close behind. They rounded the corner to find Holt's supporters struggling with malfunctioning weapons. The ensuing skirmish was brief but intense, ending with the server room secured and Holt's forces in custody. As Brian's team pushed deeper into the building, Talon's voice came through again, this time tinged with urgency. "Brian, I've just received a transmission from the Nigean homeworld. The Interim Council is preparing a preemptive strike against Earth." Brian's blood ran cold. "What? Why?" "They've seen Holt's actions as an act of aggression. They're afraid, Brian. They think it's the only way to protect our people." Brian's mind raced. A strike from the Nigeans would be catastrophic, potentially igniting an interstellar war. "We need to stop them," he said. "Can you get through to them?" There was a pause, then Talon's voice came back, filled with perseverance. "I have an idea. It's risky, but it might be our only chance." While Brian continued to lead the assault on the UTG headquarters, Talon put her plan into action. She made her way to the city's most powerful communications array, her Nigean abilities allowing her to bypass security protocols with ease. Taking a deep breath, Talon activated the array, her message broadcast simultaneously to Earth and the Nigean homeworld, her voice carrying across light years of space. "People of Earth and Nigeria," she began, her words filled with passion and sincerity. "I am Talon, once a reluctant diplomat who viewed humans with suspicion and fear. Today, I stand before you as someone transformed by understanding and love." She spoke of her experiences on Earth, of the bonds she'd formed with humans like Brian. She detailed the Purity Front conspiracy, explaining how extremists on both sides had nearly driven their species to war. "We stand at a crossroads," Talon continued, her voice growing stronger. "We can give in to fear and prejudice, or we can choose a path of cooperation and shared discovery. I have seen the best of both our species, and I know that together we are capable of greatness beyond imagining." As Talon's message reached its conclusion, Brian and his team finally broke through to the UTG command center. They burst through the doors to find Holt's inner circle in disarray, their support crumbling in the face of the revelations. Across both worlds, citizens took to the streets. But this time, their chants were not of anger, but of unity. Humans and Nigeans alike called for peace, for an end to hostilities and a new era of cooperation. Brian allowed himself a moment of hope, but he knew the fight wasn't over. Holt was still at large, and as long as he remained free, the threat of war loomed. "Talon," he said into his comm unit, "great work, but we're not done yet. Holt's holed up in the Earth Defense Command Center. We need to take him down before he can do any more damage." "I'm on my way," Talon replied. "Let's finish this together." As they regrouped outside the EDC, Brian looked at Talon, seeing his own mix of exhaustion and perseverance mirrored in her alien features. They had come so far, overcome so much. Now, with the fate of both their species hanging in the balance, they prepared for one final push. Brian turned to the assembled strike team, a mix of humans and Nigians united in purpose. "This is it," he said, his voice carrying clearly despite the chaos around them. "Everything we've fought for comes down to this moment. Are you ready?" The response was unanimous, a chorus of affirmation that transcended species. As they moved into position, Brian felt a surge of pride and hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them as one.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.